as you know, on this show, we have strong opinions, but we are driven by the data. And you know I have strong views about the Prime Minister's lies and how the result is not going to change anyone's cost of living crisis. $15 a week is not going to do something for people that are needing to find anywhere between $15,000 and $30,000 extra this year than a couple of years ago to pay off their mortgages. But we get the first polls, and they are worth showing you here because they come from the lefty organisation known as Essential Research, reported in the Turnbull Times, otherwise known as The Guardian. So where are Australians on these tax cuts? Now, of course, they didn't ask about broken promises because that may well produce a finding they don't want. These were the people who didn't include, don't know, for a large part of the referendum last year. But the numbers are telling because they're trying to find the best spin, and this is the best spin that they can put on it. Now, according to the poll released today, only half of all potential voters think that the changes are exactly what should happen. Now, they word it in a very long fashion, but essentially, just 47%, not even half, support the refocusing of stage 3 to being about low to middle income taxpayers. 41% say don't change it at all, or if you have to, delay it for 12 months for the obvious financial difficulties that people are in or the budget may well be in. But once you dig in even further, it is no slam dunk for the Prime Minister. Now, he thinks this turns everything around. The reality is just 51% of Labor supporters agree with what he's done. Now, remember, Labor voters, of course, had their lowest primary vote in a very long time at the last federal election. And you would assume that hardcore Team Red, Team Albo people, that number of approval would be closer to 75%. Instead, it's just 51%. Amazingly, the most opposed are younger voters, because 47% of 35 to 45-year-old voters, that is a very significant swing vote that, remember, we talked about a lot last year, that as, this is really sort of the Gen X or early millennials, where they go matters. Well, again, hasn't broken 50%. And just 39% of young voters support the changes. Now, this is really interesting to see because these first polls tell us that the Prime Minister thinks that the cost of you forgiving him for lying is just $15 a week. The reality is that it is pretty obvious here that what we've been talking about for a long time is the truth. The people are able to see through the spin and look at their own circumstances. They're able to work out that it is a fistful of dollars, but it's not enough to change scenarios like what we told you about last week, where huge numbers of, say, working families in Queensland are spending $200 more every week than they have income coming in, and they're amassing debt on things like credit cards by $10,000 a year. So what was all about the Prime Minister and telling his MPs that this was the solution to cost of living, it looks like it is beginning to have a very tough start. Now, we know this is a Prime Minister who was able to take a yes-no vote of 60-40 and turn it into a no-yes vote of 60-40. So he's hardly the one who's going to be able to charm his way through his own lie. But if the best headline that can be put on it by the people who did the pollster, who are polishing up a number of 47%, the best they can come up with is nearly 1 in 2 voters are backing it in. Well, guess what? Well, that does seem like, well, OK, 50 plus 1 means it's all OK. The reality is, unless it has a major surge of support, it's not going to be the circuit breaker that the Prime Minister and Labor mates want. Perfect example, again from this polling, lots of it around today. Australians believe the joint is headed in the wrong direction. They have thought this consistently for months. 49% of Australia believe that Australia is headed in the wrong direction, the wrong track, the wrong choices being made by a Prime Minister who daily shows us that he is not the man for the job. And again, interesting to see. This is a lefty poll, which is why I bring it to you in detail this evening, that 47% of Australians disapprove of his leadership. His approval level has gone down, and the disapproval level is exactly where it was when he was desperately trying to flail about at the end of the year hoping for a reset. Well, all of this evidence suggests there has been no reset. And the sales job that is currently being rolled out by the Prime Minister is not going to be effective. You see, of course, the Prime Minister has made it very clear that his word is his bond, but of course that bond is now worth nothing because he lied to millions of people about their taxation.
My word is my bond.
And he spoke so often about trust. It was a major central issue as to why you should hire him.
Trust is something that needs to be earned. But once it's lost, it's very hard to get it back. The fact is that people can't trust Scott Morrison. Who do you trust? Who do you trust? You just can't trust this government.
I will lead a government that rewards people's hard work and repays their trust.
Now, interestingly, the impact of the fall of Albanese on the question of trust has been reflected by much of the media, but there's a newspaper in Western Australia that basically backed him in hard at the last election. There are multiple seats in Western Australia that provide the government with its majority. Now remember, I think the big bet between now and the next election, whenever that will be, is about a Labor majority versus minority. We've shown you that the seat of Tangi in Western Australia would be one of those seats that would go out the window because the majority of people in the seat are the ones that have been screwed over by the decision. But even the West Australian newspaper, which again has been very favourable to Albo for a very long period of time, its editorial about all of this was, as political porkies go, Prime Minister Anthony Albanese's tax lie was a whopper. So as the Prime Minister said of the previous Prime Minister, that trust is hard to earn, but once it's gone for good. Well, you've got to say the same has to be in and around this Prime Minister. Take your pick, $275 when it comes to power bills, infrastructure projects that they promise at an election, then roll back afterwards, and a series of other decisions that we've chronicled on this program each and every night, and I appreciate how loyal you are to this program because we follow the detail. We show you the data so nobody wakes up surprised when things end up happening. We've been on it since day one about the $1,500 that was taken off 10 million workers last year, and while much of the press gallery has ignored that, guess what they're beginning to find out? Is the same people who $1,500 was taken off them by the government are hardly rewarding a government that's giving them $15 a week back. So the Prime Minister was in Queensland today. He was on a local radio station, assuming he'd only get soft questions. He didn't. But he kind of belled the cat here when he was telling anyone who'd listen, you can still trust me.
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 Sorry, I don't know where that came from. He was on radio in Queensland today, again, saying it's okay, despite the fact that I lied to your face multiple times, more than 100 times, you can trust me.
Australians can trust me to be prepared to make difficult decisions, not the easy decision. That is the priority that I have, putting people before politics.
Sure. Of course, the entire reason why all of this has happened, the way it's happened, is because of the politics of the Dunkley by-election. If Labor loses it, then there is no chance of an election anytime this year. If they win it, then they expect the tax cut, which comes in July, plus, no doubt, something else they're going to pull out of the bag will mean they can have an election as soon as August. Again, that's the data. Follow the data, not just obsess on the politics. But remember one of the things the Prime Minister was saying last week as a way of saying, please forgive me that I've broken an obvious promise.
Our government will deliver a tax cut for every single Australian taxpayer.
Well, Terry McCrann worked the numbers in the past couple of days, and guess what? Over the years, as people start to move into the bracket creep, when they start to be charged 37 cents in the dollar and then eventually the best part of half of their wage, guess what? The Albanese tax cuts to all Australians will mean that 5 million taxpayers will end up paying more. So 10 million people lost $1,500. They now want those 10 million people to thank them because they get $15 a week back. And the reality, as the years roll on, 5 million of those 10 million, half of the people who had lost $1,500 will end up paying more.